You know that moment when everything you believed about yourself completely shatters? When the person you trusted most reveals they never really saw you at all? When your deepest empathy gets weaponized against you and you're left wondering how you could have been so blind? If you're an INFJ who's been through this kind of devastation, what happened next might surprise you. Because there's a psychological mechanism that kicks in after deep betrayal that doesn't just heal you, it transforms you into something genuinely dangerous to toxic people. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly how your mind converts emotional destruction into strategic power. And trust me, once you see this process, you'll never look at your pain the same way again. Before we start, please hit the like button, comment, and subscribe so you won't miss any of our weekly deep dives into the world of personality types. And if you're looking for a deeper understanding of yourself and your INFJ personality, browse our favorite INFJ products in the description, and click the link in the comments to take our favorite free personality test. The breaking point that changes everything. The betrayal that breaks an INFJ isn't random. It follows a specific pattern that strikes at the core of who they are. It's usually someone they've poured themselves into completely. The friend they've supported through every crisis, who suddenly ghosts them without explanation. The romantic partner, who took their unconditional love for granted, then criticized them for caring too much. The family member who exploited their generosity for years, then blamed them for not doing enough. But here's what makes it devastating. INFJs don't just experience betrayal as an event. They experience it as evidence that their entire worldview was wrong. See, INFJs build their identity around their ability to understand people deeply. They pride themselves on seeing potential, on believing in others, on knowing who someone really is beneath the surface. When someone they've read completely turns out to be the opposite of what they believed, it doesn't just hurt their feelings. It destroys their confidence in their most fundamental ability. They start questioning every relationship, every intuitive hit, every moment they thought they understood someone. The foundation of their self-worth crumbles because it was built on their capacity to see and understand others accurately. This is where the psychological loop begins. INFJs replay every conversation, analyzing what they missed. They examine every interaction, every gesture, every word, trying to find where their intuition failed them. They become obsessed with figuring out how they could have been so wrong about someone they felt they knew completely. This analysis phase can last months or even years. They're not just processing the loss of the relationship. They're processing the loss of trust in themselves. They're questioning whether their empathy is actually a weakness that makes them naive. They're wondering if their ability to see the best in people is just willful blindness. During this time, their empathy becomes a weapon turned against themselves. Every kind thing they did for the person who betrayed them now feels stupid. Every time they gave someone the benefit of the doubt feels like evidence of their own foolishness. They start seeing their greatest strengths as character flaws that made them vulnerable. The isolation that follows isn't just about needing space. It's about protection. INFJs withdraw because they can't trust their own judgment anymore. If they were wrong about someone they felt so certain about, how can they trust their read on anyone else? So they disappear from social situations, cancel plans, and retreat into their inner world where nobody can witness their complete psychological reorganization. What makes this phase particularly brutal is that INFJs don't fall apart publicly. They maintain their composure at work, show up to family events, respond to messages with seeming normalcy. But internally, they're experiencing a kind of existential crisis that most people can't fathom. They're questioning their worth, their judgment, their ability to trust their own perceptions. The person who always had answers for everyone else suddenly has no answers for themselves. The one who always knew what others needed can't figure out what they need. The individual who built their entire identity around understanding and helping others feels completely lost and disconnected from that core sense of self. But here's what most people don't realize about this breaking point. It's not actually the end of their story. It's the beginning of their transformation. Because when an INFJ's foundation completely crumbles, something remarkable happens. They're forced to rebuild from scratch. And this time, They build it on something much more solid than their ability to read others perfectly. This devastation creates the exact conditions necessary for them to develop genuine power. Not the kind that comes from understanding everyone else, but the kind that comes from finally understanding themselves. The silent withdrawal phase. When an INFJ enters their withdrawal phase, they don't just step back from social situations. They completely disappear from the world in a way that's almost surgical in its precision. They stop initiating conversations, cancel plans they've had for months, and become masters of the polite but distant response. If you text them, you might get a reply, but it feels different, shorter, less engaged, like they're responding from behind bulletproof glass. This isn't depression, though it might look like it from the outside. This is strategic psychological protection. INFJs have realized that their greatest vulnerability was their openness, their willingness to let people into their inner world without proper vetting. So they shut down access completely while they figure out how to rebuild their defenses. What's happening during this silent period is actually a complete cognitive restructuring. INFJs are reviewing every relationship in their life through a new lens. They're asking themselves questions they never asked before. Who actually reciprocates the energy I give? Who shows up when I need support versus who only appears when they need something? Who sees me as a person versus who sees me as a resource? This analysis is ruthless in a way that surprises even them. The INFJ who used to make excuses for everyone's behavior suddenly sees patterns they've been ignoring for years. They notice how certain people only reach out when they need emotional support or advice. They realize how many relationships have been completely one-sided, with them doing all the emotional labor, while the other person contributes nothing meaningful. But here's where it gets interesting. INFJs process pain differently than other personality types, because of how their cognitive functions work. Their dominant function, introverted intuition, naturally looks for patterns and connections. When applied to their own pain, this function becomes a powerful analytical tool that helps them understand not just what happened, but why it happened, and how to prevent it from happening again. They start connecting dots between their past experiences. They see how their people-pleasing tendencies made them attractive to users and manipulators. They recognize how their fear of conflict led them to ignore red flags that were obvious in hindsight. They understand how their need to be needed made them vulnerable to people who had no intention of reciprocating their care. During this phase, well-meaning friends and family often try to pull them out of their isolation. They suggest therapy, social activities, or just getting back out there. But INFJs resist these efforts, sometimes to the point of seeming ungrateful or stubborn. What others don't understand is that this withdrawal is necessary work. They're not wallowing in self-pity. They're conducting a comprehensive audit of their entire approach to relationships and self-worth. The solitude that once felt like punishment gradually becomes restorative. For the first time in years, maybe decades, INFJs aren't managing anyone else's emotions or trying to solve anyone else's problems. They're not monitoring the emotional temperature of every room they enter or adjusting their behavior to make others comfortable. They're just existing as themselves, without performance or pretense. This is when they start rediscovering parts of themselves they'd forgotten existed. The hobbies they abandoned because they were too busy helping others. The dreams they shelved because they seemed selfish compared to supporting everyone else's goals. The boundaries they never learned to set because they thought love meant having none. What emerges from this period isn't the same person who went into it. The INFJ who eventually resurfaces has been fundamentally changed by the experience of sitting alone with their pain and refusing to let anyone else define their worth. They've learned something that will serve them for the rest of their lives. They can survive without external validation, and that knowledge makes them genuinely dangerous to people who depend on manipulating others' need for approval. The cognitive shift that creates power. The transformation doesn't announce itself with fanfare. There's no dramatic moment where everything suddenly clicks into place. Instead, it happens gradually, like the slow turn of a massive ship changing course. One day, the INFJ realizes they've stopped asking themselves what they did wrong, and started asking what the other person revealed about themselves. This shift is the psychological equivalent of flipping a switch. The victim mindset that kept them trapped in analysis and self-doubt gets replaced by something much more dangerous to toxic people: strategic thinking. The INFJ, who used to blame themselves for not being enough, starts recognizing manipulation tactics. The person who once made excuses for everyone's behavior begins seeing patterns of exploitation. Their intuition, which had been clouded by idealism and the desperate need to see good in everyone, suddenly becomes laser-focused and ruthlessly realistic. They start trusting those gut feelings they used to dismiss as being too judgmental. When someone's words don't match their actions, they notice immediately. When someone love bombs them with excessive attention early in a relationship, they recognize it as a red flag instead of feeling flattered. This is where their empathy transforms from weakness to weapon. Before, their ability to feel what others felt made them vulnerable because they absorbed everyone's pain and made it their responsibility to fix. Now, that same empathy becomes a sophisticated detection system. They can sense when someone is being manipulative, when someone is lying, when someone is trying to guilt them into doing something they don't want to do. The boundaries that seemed impossible to set before suddenly become non-negotiable. The INFJ, who used to say yes to everything, starts saying no without lengthy explanations or apologies. They stop over-explaining their decisions because they realize that people who respect them don't need a dissertation on why they can't drop everything to solve someone else's crisis. But here's what makes this shift genuinely powerful. They develop immunity to the tactics that used to control them. Guilt trips that would have sent them into a spiral of self-doubt now bounce off like water off glass. Emotional manipulation that used to make them question their own perceptions gets recognized instantly for what it is. People who try to make them feel selfish for having boundaries discover that the old buttons don't work anymore. The INFJ starts making decisions based on what serves their highest good, instead of what makes everyone else comfortable. They choose relationships that energize them rather than drain them. They pursue goals that align with their authentic values instead of what they think they should want. They stop performing the version of themselves that others expect and start showing up as who they actually are. This authenticity creates a kind of quiet authority that people notice immediately. There's something different about them now, something more solid, more real, more genuinely confident. They're not trying to prove anything to anyone because they finally understand their own worth isn't up for debate. The people who benefited from their old patterns of self-sacrifice and people-pleasing often react badly to this transformation. They might accuse the INFJ of becoming cold, selfish, or mean. They might try to guilt them back into their old role as the giver who never receives. But these reactions only confirm that the INFJ's new boundaries are working exactly as intended. What emerges is someone who can still love deeply and help others, but from a position of strength rather than desperation. They offer support because they choose to, not because they're afraid of being abandoned if they don't. They care about people's problems without making those problems their own responsibility. They can be present for someone's pain without drowning in it themselves. This shift makes them genuinely dangerous to toxic people because they can no longer be exploited. The user who counted on their endless generosity finds a person who gives strategically. The manipulator who relied on their self-doubt encounters someone who trusts their own perceptions. The emotional vampire who fed on their empathy discovers that the all-you-can-eat buffet has been permanently closed. The strategic advantage of transformed INFJs. The INFJ who emerges from this transformation possesses something that can't be taught in any self-help book or therapy session: unshakable self-knowledge, earned through fire. They know exactly who they are because they've been stripped down to their core and rebuilt themselves from the ground up. This isn't confidence borrowed from external validation or positive thinking mantras. This is the quiet certainty that comes from surviving your own psychological destruction and choosing to become something stronger. This self-knowledge creates a strategic advantage that most people never develop. Transformed INFJs can spot manipulation from a mile away because they've been on the receiving end of every tactic in the book. They recognize love bombing because they've been swept off their feet by someone who disappeared the moment they needed support. They identify guilt trips instantly because they felt the weight of undeserved responsibility for other people's choices. They see through fake apologies because they've accepted hollow words too many times before. But their real superpower isn't just recognizing toxic behavior. It's their ability to read the motivations behind people's actions with surgical precision. Their intuition, now freed from the need to see good in everyone, becomes a sophisticated analysis tool that cuts through social masks and polite facades. They can sense when someone is being authentic versus when they're performing. They notice when people's energy shifts based on what they think they can get from the interaction. This makes them master strategists in social situations. They know exactly how much of themselves to reveal and when. They understand that not everyone deserves access to their inner world, and they guard that access carefully. They can be warm and friendly without being vulnerable. They can help others without sacrificing themselves. They can maintain relationships without losing their identity in the process. The transformed INFJ becomes incredibly selective about who they allow into their life, and this selectivity creates higher quality relationships across the board. They're no longer attracted to people who need fixing or saving. They don't confuse intensity with intimacy or drama with passion. They look for consistency, reciprocity, and genuine respect. They choose people who add value to their life, rather than people who drain their energy. This selectivity extends to every area of their life. They become strategic about their career choices, pursuing work that aligns with their authentic values, rather than what they think they should do. They're selective about their commitments, saying yes only to things that genuinely matter to them. They're careful with their energy, recognizing it as a finite resource that should be invested wisely rather than scattered everywhere. People notice something fundamentally different about them now. There's a presence, an authority that wasn't there before. They command respect without demanding it. They influence others through authenticity rather than manipulation. When they speak, people listen because they only speak when they have something meaningful to say. When they commit to something, people trust that commitment because they know the INFJ has chosen it deliberately. The quiet authority that emerges from surviving their own destruction is perhaps their greatest asset. They're not trying to prove anything to anyone because they've already proven everything to themselves. They faced their worst fear, complete psychological annihilation, and discovered they could rebuild themselves into something stronger. This knowledge gives them a kind of fearlessness that's magnetic to healthy people and terrifying to toxic ones. They become living proof that pain doesn't have to destroy you, that betrayal doesn't have to make you bitter, that losing everything can actually be the beginning of gaining what truly matters. Their very existence becomes a threat to people who count on others staying broken, staying needy, staying afraid to demand better treatment. The strategic advantage of a transformed INFJ isn't that they've become cold or calculating. It's that they've learned to love themselves as fiercely as they love others. And that self-love creates an unbreachable foundation that no one can shake. The integration and permanent power. When all the pieces finally come together, something remarkable happens. The INFJ doesn't just return to who they were before the pain. They become someone entirely new, someone who has integrated every lesson, every insight, every hard-won truth into a coherent way of being that serves them powerfully. This integration phase is where the transformation becomes permanent. They're no longer consciously applying boundaries or strategically managing their empathy. These new patterns have become their natural way of operating in the world. The hypervigilance that characterized their early recovery softens into confident discernment. The protective walls they built become selective filters that let in what serves them and keeps out what doesn't. The practices that maintain their new level of power become second nature. They automatically check in with themselves before committing to anything. They instinctively notice when someone's energy feels off, or when a situation doesn't align with their values. They maintain their solitude not as escape from the world, but as essential fuel that keeps them operating from a place of fullness rather than depletion. What's beautiful about this stage is that they haven't lost their capacity for deep connection or their desire to help others. Instead, they've learned to offer these gifts from a position of genuine strength. When they help someone now, it's because they choose to, not because they're afraid of being abandoned if they don't. When they love someone, it's because that person has earned their trust and respect, not because they're trying to prove their own worth. Their pain becomes their greatest competitive advantage in ways they never expected. They can spot authenticity because they've experienced the devastating cost of its absence. They can offer genuine wisdom to others who are struggling because they've walked through their own dark night of the soul and emerged stronger. They can hold space for someone else's transformation because they understand intimately what that process requires. The INFJ who has completed this journey becomes a force of nature in the best possible way. They're fully themselves without apology, and that authenticity gives them a kind of power that can't be manufactured or faked. They influence others through their presence rather than their performance. They command respect through their consistency rather than their compliance. When they encounter toxic people now, something interesting happens. These individuals sense immediately that the old tactics won't work. The guilt trips, the manipulation, the emotional blackmail, all of it bounces off harmlessly because the INFJ has developed genuine immunity to these strategies. They can see the manipulation for what it is and respond accordingly, without anger or drama, but with clear, unshakable boundaries. This is the final form of an INFJ who has weaponized their wounds. Someone who has transformed their greatest vulnerability into their greatest strength, their deepest pain into their most powerful tool for discernment, their most devastating loss into their most valuable source of wisdom. Your pain isn't your weakness. It's the forge that creates unbreakable strength. Every betrayal, every moment of devastation, every time someone made you question your worth, all of it was preparing you for this transformation into someone who can't be broken again. Click the link in the comments to take our free personality test and discover more about your unique psychological patterns. Subscribe for more insights into the INFJ mind. If you want to continue the journey to understanding yourself or an INFJ in your life, click either of the following videos where we continue to unlock the secrets of the INFJ personality type.